Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this beautiful Thursday, May 23rd, 2019 day. I am your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you have decided to join us, though you've had to put up with me thus far for 2 days already, 6 hours, and now another 3 hours today. But that's a strong character quality of you to be able to endure such punishment. But it's also count me exceedingly grateful for the opportunity to be able to come with you all. And again, Kirby is out on break over this next little stretch, and so gratefully I am filling in for him. And we have got quite a show for you today, as we often do. We're going to be talking about everything from the abortion laws and some of the ramifications that are spinning out of Georgia right now, to also be interviewing Sam Kleiner, who's got a book out called The Flying Tigers, the Untold Story of American Pilots Who Waged a Secret War Against Japan. So we'll be talking with him about this great new book. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating, really an untold, I was very unaware of the Flying Tigers before I read his book, and so really excited to be able to talk with him. And what I found is hopefully to be able to add some texture to our understanding. As an amateur historian, I've realized that it's very easy for us to look into the past and to project what we have here in the present onto the past. And so everything from just assuming the culture was the way that it is right now, it wasn't the case, to assume that the safety of airplanes that we experience today was the same when it first started around World War II era, and that's just not the case. So those are just a couple of data points that we can point to that I really am excited to be able to talk with him about his book, The Flying Tigers, The Untold Story of American Pilots Who Waged a Secret War Against Japan. It's just a very good book, and looking forward to having him on the show, as well as talking with Ashkhen Kazaryan a little bit later on in the show, talking about technology and freedom of speech. Very much looking forward to having that conversation, especially in light of our conversations over Facebook and what it seems as though the censorship of individuals. And so what does that look like moving forward? What's really going to be of interest to me is to see if we can't start talking about what's happening in China, specifically among the Uyghur people. The Uyghur people are located, it's a small Muslim community in the western part of China. And what we know right now that's happening is that the Chinese government officials are beginning to monitor and have a significant level of surveillance upon these individuals, to the extent that they know where they are, know what they're doing, know what they're purchasing. There's just significant surveillance footage and activity that the Chinese officials are doing. And what are the implications for that if the Chinese government were to perfect that, to improve that to such an extent that they started exporting that as well? I think those are conversations that we're increasingly going to need to have as technology becomes not only more kind of invading into our personal space, but two, has the propensity to know us probably better than we know ourselves. And so we'll be talking with Ashkhen here in the 2 o'clock hour, but we'll be jumping on the news as well. So how about we jump into the news, shall we? So according to USA Today, 2 film productions quit Georgia over a restrictive abortion law. If you will remember, earlier last week, Georgia officials signed into law, the Georgia governor signed into law Alabama governor signed into law what was just a very strict pro-life bill that did not provide any exemptions whatsoever, only in the woman's house. So there was no rape exemption, no incest exemption, but just a very strict bill. And what we're seeing is these type of abortion bills are beginning to populate all across the southern part of the United States. Even earlier this week, a bill was passed in Missouri as well. But nevertheless, focusing on Georgia's heartbeat bill, which really bans abortion after a fetal heartbeat can be detected. Well, that significant move among pro-lifers has caused pro-choicers to begin to walk away. And in this particular instance in Georgia, Lionsgate comedy Barb and Star go to Vista Del Mar, starring Kristen Wiig and Annie Mumolo. Wiig, of course, is from SNL. And then there's also an Amazon series, The Power, where initially to be shot in Georgia, but will now relocate production. Georgia's gone to great lengths over the past 5 to 10 years to be able to bring in film studios, providing tax breaks and incentives for them to come. And what they're finding now is it's very reminiscent of what happened just a few years back when North Carolina passed their transgender bathroom bill. When North Carolina passed that transgender bathroom bill, if we'll remember a couple of years back, individuals and entities started pulling their business out of North Carolina. Probably the most glaring example of that was the NCAA basketball tournament, March Madness, as it's affectionately known, pulled out of North Carolina, the Final Four, and relocated, I believe, to Indiana, if memory serves me correctly, because of that bathroom bill. Fast forward 2 years to present day, and now we have something very similar that's happening in Georgia right now, where Governor Deal has signed that fetal heartbeat bill, and because of that, individuals, especially on the pro-choice side, are beginning to pull back from their commitments in the state. What's fascinating is you're even not just seeing this in Hollywood, but you're also seeing this among state officials as well. State officials in Colorado and Maryland have banned government employees from traveling to Alabama for work-related projects. Maryland also announced a plan to divest their $52 billion retirement pension fund from Alabama businesses. Basketball legend Kareem Abdul-Jabbar called for a boycott, referring to Alabama as a stain on our democracy. And over at the New York Times this morning, Dr. Warren Hearn argues in his op-ed that it's pregnancy that kills and abortion that actually saves. According to his argument, that there are certain instances where the mother, as we do know, that pregnancy has a potentiality to go south, and that abortion is the really thing that saves them in that particular instance. And so those outlier cases are now becoming a subject of the premier understanding of this. And what's fascinating is Dr. Warren Hearn earned himself some space within the New York Times op-ed section. Alabama is the latest battleground in the culture war. The pro-life side made a great advance last week and now finds itself taking a lot of heat. Inevitably, the question lingers as to whether such progress is worth it in the abortion front. It reminds me of when Moses considered leaving the comforts of the palace for a tent in the desert. He determined that the reproach of Christ was of greater wealth than the treasures of Pharaoh, according to Hebrews 11:26. If I'm just being honest with you all, today I'd rather be unpopular in a culture of life than comfortable in a culture of death. Yes, businesses will inevitably continue to pull some of their resources from states as well as municipalities that stand for life. But at the end of the day, I'd rather show myself approved before God rather than earn the favor of men. We have got to take a break, but when we come back from the break, we're going to continue to find our way in the midst of the news. What's most intriguing was a walkout of the Oval Office yesterday. President Trump walked out on the Speaker Pelosi and Senate Majority Leader Schumer after a 3-minute conversation, and what followed thereafter was something for the headlines. But we've got to take a break right now. But when we come back, more from Point of View.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Astute political observers frequently notice the large gap between rhetoric and reality. That is certainly true of some of the Democrat governors in blue states. Their political rhetoric has been critical of the Trump tax reform. The reality is that their state budgets have benefited significantly from those tax cuts, along with the Trump administration deregulation. Fortunately, the editors of the Wall Street Journal collected the news stories and economic numbers to show that blue states are actually receiving a blue state dividend. A rising economic tide is lifting those states in ways that aren't often acknowledged. For example, the governor of California recently was able to revise the Golden State budget to include a $21 billion surplus. That is already a few percentage points higher than the projection just a few months ago. Illinois reported earlier this month that the individual and corporate tax revenues exceeded internal forecasts by more than $1 billion. That should eliminate most of the state's budget gap for this year. These are not the only examples. The Pew Charitable Trust noted that tax revenues in 41 states have hit records even after accounting for inflation. Revenue was up in blue states like California, New York, Connecticut, and Washington. Of course, it was also up in red states like Tennessee and Texas. At least the Pew report acknowledged that this significant and extended stretch of growth was due to the federal Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. The increased revenue to these states was due to favorable economic conditions and robust stock returns. One more point is worth mentioning. While these state budgets have received a dividend from tax cuts and deregulation, the citizens of those states should not expect that this dividend would be passed on to them. Politicians in those states were merely going to find another way to spend that additional revenue. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. We have been talking a little bit about the headline news of the day, and we'll continue doing that as well. We're talking a little bit about some of the backlash from these abortion bills that have been passed all throughout the country, really, but really focused in the South. Specifically, we were talking about how certain production companies and organizations are leaving Georgia after their fetal heartbeat bill that came. And just a reminder that increasingly, as pro-life continues to make particular strides in this culture war, as they continue to fight for life, there are going to be certain individuals and entities that decide that they're going to seek to take back and seek to react to some of this news, as we're seeing play out in Georgia right now. And inevitably, it's going to ask the question, how is it worth it, right? The lingering doubt, the lingering question that's going to continue to kind of circle the air of the time is, are our efforts worthy? Should we continue on? And I'm just always reminded of Moses in that particular moment, and specifically in that Hebrews passage. I'm trying to consider it from my own perspective of just thinking about the luxury that Moses enjoyed while he was in Pharaoh's palace, that he had a place to sleep, he had servants to wait on him. He was the favored. He was treated like a son. But the prospect of hearing the Lord's call and deciding to leave all of that in order that he could lead a group of people through the wilderness that not only complained but also were backbiting, that also betrayed him. The wear and tear of that, not even knowing if they were going to be able to have the food that they had, to the literal degree that God provided manna, which means, what is it? Moses would then recount that he believed it to be true that that reproach, leaving the luxury of Pharaoh's palace, was nothing in comparison to experiencing the wandering in the wilderness and in the desert. For us today, I can't help but think that we are going to continue, as we push to fight and protect life, will continue to be unpopular. We will continue to suffer financial difficulty as these states are now beginning to bear the brunt of, because certain organizations and entities don't want to do business with those individuals any longer. And so the question that will continue to linger in the back of our minds is it worth it? Well, as I said, I would far rather be comfortable. I would far rather be uncomfortable with Christ than comfortable without him. I'd far rather be unpopular in a culture of life than comfortable in a culture of death. But there's other news that's been making the headlines, to say the very least. Out of the New York Times, Trump angered by phony inquiries and blows up meeting with Speaker Pelosi and Senate Majority Leader Schumer. It was a meeting that was scheduled around what is today Infrastructure Week. So for those of you that aren't celebrating appropriately, a shame on you for not celebrating our infrastructure. But today in particular is Lucky Penny Day. So I guess you could say that you found the penny heads up, and the face of the penny isn't Abraham Lincoln. It's me, if you're watching on Facebook. But nevertheless, I don't know if that's necessarily considered lucky or a curse. But we'll continue on. President Trump abruptly blew up a scheduled meeting with Democratic congressional leaders on Wednesday, lashing out at Speaker Nancy Pelosi for accusing him of a cover-up and declaring that he could not work with them until they stopped investigating him. What was fascinating is this meeting that had been built up for weeks on end as they were going to negotiate not only this $2 billion infrastructure plan, but also where was the funding going to come from. And there was this speculation, there was all of these hypotheses that were being put out as to how they might be able to fund this. And so this meeting was largely seen as, okay, this is how President Trump is going to present how he's going to fund this infrastructure bill. Infrastructure has traditionally been the thing that can unite Democrats and Republicans. Something about building not only literal bridges, but also hopefully the figurative bridge would be built as well between the two. But that wasn't the case. After 3 minutes of an Oval Office meeting, President Trump marched into the Rose Garden where reporters had been gathered in anticipation of what would be results from this particular meeting. And he delivered a statement that New York Times characterizes as, quote, bristling with anger, close quote, as he demanded that Democrats get these phony investigations over with. He said that he couldn't legislate at this time while the investigators were looming over his shoulder. Just recently, I read Thomas Sowell's book, A Conflict of Vision. And in it, he argues that the two parties address problems radically differently due to their conceptions of the world. They view the world very differently. Conservatives, channeling Edmund Burke, believe we live in a constrained world and deal in a series of trade-offs. A constrained world being that we live in a very fallen world. Man, as Immanuel Kant would say, that we are made of crooked timber. As Dante would put it in his work, that we have dark wood inside of us. We live in a constrained world because perfection is not achievable for us, but rather good enough is where we're moving towards. Hence the reason why there's a series of trade-offs. We're just trying to make progress. As Yuval Levin puts it in his book, The Great Debate, conservatives more often than not are about reform instead of revolution. And so hear that when you read President Trump's description of the meeting. He says, quote, I walked into the room and I told Senator Schumer and Speaker Pelosi, I want to do infrastructure. I want to do it more than you want to do it. I'd really be good at it. That's what I do. But you know what? You can't do it under these circumstances. So get these phony investigations over with. Did you hear, close quote, did you hear the trade-off that he said? The trade-off was, I'll do the deal if you'll get off my back with the investigators. There was a trade-off that was happening at that particular moment within the constrained worldview. It can't be perfect, but we can do better. And so President Trump, being true to Sewell's A Conflict of Visions, responded in that trade-off. But notice what progressives do. So progressives, channeling William Godwin, believe we live in an unconstrained world and propose ideal solutions. Any hint of imperfection with someone's intentions or in the current system requires revolution. So when you live in an unconstrained world, think about Rousseau for a second. Think about certain individuals that would say that man is inherently good, and it's the systems and structures that are put into place that hinder him from being able to illuminate and being able to embody his goodness. And because of that, then it's not reforms, it's revolution. And so whenever there's any hints of imperfection in the current system, what needs to happen? Completely get rid of the system and try again based upon what you know to produce the most perfect system that you can. And so listen to what Speaker Pelosi and Senator Schumer said. Speaker Pelosi says, quote, "I knew he was looking for a way out. We were expecting this," close quote. You hear that? The intention of him looking for a way out kept them from being able to implement the proposed ideal solution. Listen to Senator Schumer response. This is a quote. "We are interested in doing infrastructure. It's clear the president isn't," close quote. Do you hear the intention? It's being questioned, one, and then the shutdown happening, two. You see, conservatives live in a constrained world dealing in a series of trade-offs. Progressives move in an unconstrained world vying for ideal solutions. But Christians have our eyes set on another world, as Paul says in Colossians 3:2. We are peacemakers, is what Matthew 5:9 says. Peace never comes idly. That's the status quo. But you see, when we pray, as Tim Keller observed, we do battle with the status quo. It will be increasingly important in this very divisive culture that we find ourselves in, rife with partisanship, to be praying for God to raise up peacemakers of another world. But we've got to go to a break. But I'd be interested to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this proposed infrastructure plan? Maybe on the tie-up, I guess you would say, on the crash that happened on the bridge, figurative bridge that happened between Senate Democrats and the president, the leader of the Republican Party. We'd be interested to hear from you. What are your comments that you might be able to offer up, questions that you might be able to have? You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can go to Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And when you go to facebook.com/pointofviewradio, and after you like the page, because inevitably you love what we're doing here, so you want to like the page, then you'll go see the live video box. And then when you see my picture, you just go ahead and scroll on past it and get to that comment part underneath the live video box and leave a comment or question. And what you share online, we'll try to get to over air. But we got to take a break right now. But when we come back from the break, more from Point of View right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. We have been talking a little bit about the news of the day. Specifically, we were talking a little bit about how certain industries and certain companies are making their way out of the state of Georgia and states like them because of bills that have been passed relative to abortion restrictions. And so specifically, we were talking about how 2 film productions quit Georgia over the restrictive abortion law, one starring SNL star Kristen Wiig, and the other kind of an Amazon series by Reed Morano. And that's just the latest in what appears to be a continual backlash among individuals that are of the pro-choice variety, deciding to take their business elsewhere, very reminiscent of what happened a few years back in North Carolina when they passed the transgender bathroom bill. Then we shifted our gears a little bit and made our way up north and decided that we would talk a little bit about what's happening in D.C. right now. Specifically, we knew that yesterday, as you should be celebrating Infrastructure Week, as we all should be trying to build little miniature bridges everywhere that we are, being able to pull out our round up, and hopefully to get rid of some of the weeds in light of Infrastructure Week. But nevertheless, President Trump stormed out of a meeting after 3 minutes yesterday, which was supposed to be a meeting that really did try to solidify and work out some of the large details over this infrastructure bill package that's been put forward and proposed, at least, numbering $2 billion rather. Traditionally, infrastructure has been that kind of topic, that issue that Democrats and Republicans have had some semblance of bipartisanship that they've been able to come over. But apparently this did not go well before the meeting. Nancy Pelosi said President Trump appears to be covering up. And as we know, the president doesn't necessarily have kind words and doesn't necessarily, I guess you would say the Mueller probe kind of sets him off, to say the very least. And so he walked into the room and then he offered up some pretty harsh words to Nancy, quote, just his retelling. So what he says is, quote, I walked into the room and I told Senator Schumer and Speaker Pelosi, I want to do infrastructure. I want to do it more than you want to do it. I'd be really good at it. That's what I do. But you know what? You can't do it under these circumstances. So get these phony investigations over with. And so he put the proposition before them that they can either, one, move forward with infrastructure, but only if on the condition that they stop some of these investigations. And it does not appear as though these investigations are going to stop. Interestingly enough, Speaker Pelosi, I'm sorry, to give her credit where credit is due, finds herself in a bit of a tenuous position right now as she tries to corral her own party caucus. Some individuals, specifically some of the freshman younger voices of the party, have decided that they want to move forward relative to impeachment. And Nancy Pelosi and some of her leadership, the majority leader Steny Hoyer and the whip James Clyburn, have all expressed no interest whatsoever in putting forward impeachment procedure, simply because they believe it would be divisive and it would not bode well for them or some of their members that are in swing districts. And so they've been trying to push that off. And so, needless to say, Infrastructure Week, the bridge has fallen out, and I don't anticipate us figuring out how we might be able to rebuild that in the midst of Infrastructure Week. But what has been interesting is, I guess you would say, some things that are coming out of Beverly Hills. And so specifically, Beverly Hills voted yesterday to ban tobacco sales. But interestingly enough, it exempted Arnold Schwarzenegger's favorite cigar club. This coming from the LA Times. The city of Beverly Hills cleared the last hurdle to enact what officials say is the most stringent tobacco ban in the country, eliminating the sale of virtually all recreational nicotine products, with one very Beverly Hills exception. So some of the lists of banned items include cigarettes, cigars, cigarillo, pipe tobacco, snuff, chewing tobacco, smokeless tobacco, and any electronic cigarette, city documents say. But there was an exemption. The vapes are dead, but for an elite group of an aficionados, hundreds of whom swamped committee meetings and wrote the city in protest, cigars will be spared as long as they're smoked inside of one of 3 dedicated lounges, one of those being an exclusive club called the Grand Havana Room on North Cannon Drive. The club's so exclusive, its members need a special key to get in. Schwarzenegger has been very clear that he supported the ban but wanted the exception. The former governor has gone to great lengths to be able to articulate and communicate his position. But interestingly enough, though the Clampetts made their way to Beverly Hills, what's happening in Beverly Hills is swinging out across the country. Earlier this week, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell of Kentucky introduced legislation to raise the minimum age for buying any tobacco products from 18 to 21. A 2017 survey found that almost all adult smokers began smoking before they turned 21. Smoking is down, but it's still existent here in the U.S. In 2005, 20.9% of American adults smoked. By 2016, that number dropped to 15.5%, which is approximately 38 million individuals. What I found interesting is if you compare and contrast this, if you run these two parallel between individuals that are cigarette smokers and individuals that smoke marijuana, increasingly these numbers are becoming very close. When you put them side by side, and it's individuals that can say that they have smoked this past year, that there are approximately 53 million Americans that can say relative to cigarettes they've smoked a cigarette this past year. Among individuals that have smoked marijuana, that number is around 50 million. So increasingly, and what's funny though, it's not really funny. What's interesting, I guess you could say, is that it's actually parents that are smoking weed at the highest levels. Now, granted, we have to remember that parents also include millennials now. Millennials have grown up, and they're not simply just individuals that are playing video games, even though many of them are playing video games and then coming home after going to school. Now, there's a large contingent of millennials, almost all millennials, we would traditionally associate with being of the age that they can raise kids now and get married. So, nevertheless, though we're smoking less than what we've normally done, it's still prevalent. But there's an increase in the number of individuals, states specifically, that are trying to increase this age to eradicate individuals' habits of smoking. 12 states thus far have raised the legal age to purchase tobacco products to 21 years old. And so how are we to think of this as Christians? Because being completely honest with you all, I grew up in a Christian home, but I was keenly aware of individuals. I had my papa smoked. I had my grandfather that enjoyed a cigar and a pipe every now and then. And so what are we to think about? Is this a hot topic issue, or we just need to simply reject it? You know, there's a framework by which we can understand this. We can either wholeheartedly accept it, we can redeem it, or we can just completely reject it. From a Christian standpoint, for example, we would just completely reject, there's no redeemable qualities in, say, a strip club. And so we just completely reject trying to redeem that or trying to even think about utilizing their services. But for, we'll say, reading the Bible, we would completely accept that. There's no conditions that we need to put on that. We wholeheartedly agree that it's really good to read the Bible. So we accept that cultural artifact. But maybe there's certain things to redeem. John Piper has a really good point on this that's just captivated my imagination. And he makes a further delineation between individuals that smoke. He would make the delineation between individuals that are smoking, we'll say, 2 packs a day, and the individual that enjoys a cigar or a cigarette every now and then. When you're smoking 2 packs a day, he would argue that you're enjoying those pleasures. You're enjoying that far greater than the pleasures of what you would find in the respite and the comfort that you would find in communion with God. You're telling a watching world by smoking so much that you are attuned away and not interested in the things of the Lord. I think it's persuasive, but I don't know if I would necessarily completely agree with it. But here's what I do know. As Christians, we know our bodies are temples. The temple was once a place you went to offer sacrifices and commune with God. But because of Jesus, we no longer go to the temple, but the temple abides inside of us. God died for us and now lives inside of us. Smoking may be permissible, but don't let it keep you from being beneficial for his kingdom's sake, for the good of the world, and for the joy of your soul. We've got to take another break, but when we come back from the break, we'll continue to make our way through the news. There's a couple of interesting pieces out that I'm really interested in getting to, specifically regarding summer camp. We're coming up on that time where many individuals are thinking, do I send the kids to camp or do I go to work? Well, there's some interesting research that I think is worthy of consideration, but we've got to go to a break right now. So, but when we come back from the break, more from Point of View and summer camp. Summer loving, feeling so fine that summer's coming. Do you have a plan for that? We'll be back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. And for those of you that were with us at the previous break, I apologize for my corny reference. It only gets worse, but I just wanted you to know I was keenly aware of how corny it was. But nevertheless, that's what you get when you tune into Point of View when the millennial is hosting a bunch of cream corn. But nevertheless, let's continue on the conversation, shall we? We've made our way through the news thus far. We've been talking a little bit about what's happening in D.C. right now, to the impasse over Infrastructure Week between President Trump, Speaker Pelosi, Senator Schumer. We talked a little bit about what's happening in Georgia right now as individuals, the pro-life movement continues to make strides forward, and pro-choice individuals are continuing to pull back and specifically pull their business with them as well outside the state, to then making our way to Beverly Hills. And so while similar to the Clampetts, making our way over there and to Beverly Hills, where it appears as though a tobacco ban is going to go into effect in Beverly Hills, except for one exception, cigars, and specifically around 3 cigar shops in Beverly Hills. And trying to think through it from a Christian perspective. For those that are listening in Tennessee, I had an opportunity. This is a little tangent. I had the opportunity to serve as my student government president when I was in college at Austin Peay State University, home of the Fighting Governors of Austin Peay. And one of the interesting things that happened is I was in school before you started seeing a lot of these bans on smoking. So there was still quite a bit of a presence of smoking on campus, and decided that Austin Peay wanted to be at the forefront of getting rid of smoking on campus. And so my senior year, I led an effort to remove smoking on campus and to make it illegal, just as a huge no smoking ban on campus. Well, I can tell you towards the end of that senior year, I was not liked at all because of that. But now it's become like the thing, and everybody doesn't smoke anymore on college campuses. So all that to say, that's my little part that I could play in that no smoking ban. But let's jump on over to a Wall Street Journal article that has captivated my attentions, shall we? Your kid wants to be a YouTube. There's a camp for that, according to the Wall Street Journal. Increasingly, more and more parents are sending their kids to summer camp that involves helping them become a YouTube star. According to the Journal, these camps bring up a debate raging in many households, whether it allow their children to post videos on YouTube. It gets at perhaps the biggest question of parenting in this digital age, which is how much leeway to give children in this fast-changing frontier while also protecting them from themselves as much as from others. An individual from a Denver investment fund, Nicole Champin, is sending her 12-year-old son to a YouTube camp this year offered by ID Tech Camps, which charges an average of $1,000 for its week-long YouTube camps for 10 to 17-year-olds. Her son wants to post videos of himself playing Fortnite. So John Travolta crooned about summer loving, and parents are preparing because summer's coming. Growing up, the closest I got to camp was watching Salute Your Shorts on Nickelodeon. Some went to camp and others went to work, myself included. In 1918, there were roughly 1,000 camps in the U.S. Today, there are more than 14,000, around 8,400 overnight camps, 5,600 day camps. More individuals are going to camp and fewer individuals are going to work. In July of 2016, 43% of 16 to 19-year-olds were either working or looking for a job. In July of 2006, that number was 10 points higher, registering at 53%. But notice in 1988, that number was 70%. As for me and my house, there was only one option for me. I could either get a job or get a job when summer came. And so my dad was gracious enough to make sure that I had a job as well. And I remember working for the Clarksville-Montgomery County School System in Clarksville, Tennessee. I was charged with manning a weed eater. And so I need to get a proper picture in your head, you all. That when you think about a weed eater, you think about an individual that's edging along the side. And I need you to know to strike that. You just need to strike that from your memory. Because when I was given a little Makita weed eater, I was told, okay, I was on a team of an individual that would be driving a tractor, an individual that would be driving a zero-turn lawnmower, and then me, the little weed eater. And we would go to a school. And the tractor would go, obviously, towards the big fields. It would mow the grass. The zero turn would make its way around the actual school. And for me, with my weed eater, more often than not, there was usually a big hill, because in Tennessee we just had these monstrous hills. And the zero turn couldn't go on it because it would slide down it. The tractor couldn't go on it because it was too big. But the weed eater could go on it, and specifically me with my little weed eater. So I am swinging this weed eater back and forth, and I have the small little engine on my hip while I'm swinging it back and forth. So I still have, I'm sure at my parents' house, I still have these jeans that would just have these 2 burned hole marks in them while I just swung this weed eater back and forth upon this hill until 11:30. When if it was a normal day, I would have a lunch in the hot Tennessee sun with the humidity. But if it was a good day, I'd go to the VFW hall and we get the blue plate special. And so it usually would extend lunch anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes. And so I was super pumped when that day happened. But I will tell you this, though. I am biased, but I am extremely grateful for the job I had over the summer. While the classroom cognitively prepared me for the workforce, time outside the classroom developed and inculcated in my character a sense of diligence and a hearty work ethic that I am forever grateful for. You see, we follow after a God that's been likened to a potter, and we are the clay. He can shape us with both a weed eater while edging a driveway or some scissors during arts and craft time. And we just have to be keenly aware that he wants to shape us. Are we moldable enough to be shaped? Or are we similar to Pharaoh's heart that was hardened and is unmoldable and therefore unusable? And so we have got to go to a break, but when we come back from the break, we're going to continue on with the topics of the day. There's some interesting research out that I think would be particularly of interest to you coming up on the Memorial Day holiday. And so we'll be talking a little bit about that. We'll be talking also about some of the church abuse scandal that's happening. There's been some new research that was put out by Lifeway Christian Resources, and so we'll touch on some of that as well. And then we'll be welcoming over the phone Sam Kleiner. He's the author of The Flying Tigers, the untold story of American pilots who waged a secret war against Japan. I can go ahead and tell you this. You are going to want to stick around for this. This is a phenomenal little book that's in my briefcase right now that I'm going to pull out. I've got a litany of notes that I'm going to have to get to and questions that I can't wait to ask Sam. I'm extremely interested in what was happening in World War II, thought I was well read on World War II, and then I read this book and had no clue this was going on. And so really excited to, one, be able to help you all understand some of the heroic efforts that were happening by brave Americans during World War II, but also in turn, hopefully add some texture. And I'm really going to be interested to hear his thoughts, because when you're reading during that time, it seems like a completely different era, not only from a political standpoint, from a foreign policy standpoint, but even from an American spirit standpoint. A different type of American was fighting than those that we find ourselves surrounded by today. And so I'm really going to be interested to hear why now. Why did he write this book at this point in time? But we'll have him here with us in studio, Sam Kleiner. So you're going to want to stick around as he discusses his book, The Flying Tigers. You can find out more information on that book, as well as order that book on our website, pointofview.net. But we've got to take a break. But when we come back, we'll be joined by Sam Kleiner right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net. Or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this beautiful Thursday, May 23rd, 2019 day. Kirby Anderson is off for the day. You've got to put up with me, the millennial, the selfie-taking, Uber riding, student debt accumulating millennial. So grateful that you have decided to join us today. We've got a great show for you. We've already been going for an hour, and so we talked a little bit about what happened up in D.C. We had with the Infrastructure Week, where there were individuals, specifically President Trump, and the supposed meeting that was happening, and then what lasted for only 3 minutes, according to reports. And then President Trump trotted out to the Rose Garden and expressed his frustration with things the way that they are. We talked a little bit about what was happening in Alabama as well, or specifically in Georgia, with some of these abortion laws that are continuing to be put onto the books. How when pro-life individuals take a stand, it looks as though pro-choice individuals and entities are taking a walk out. And then we made our way over, similar to the Clampetts, to Beverly Hills and continued to talk about what's happening in Beverly Hills, specifically with the ban on with tobacco products, except for a couple of cigar lounges that Arnold Schwarzenegger, the former governor of California, happens to frequent. And thinking about all of those things, trying to think about them from a biblical perspective. But now we are joined over the phone by Sam Kleiner. He is the author of the book, The Flying Tigers, the Untold Story of American Pilots Who Waged a Secret War Against Japan. Sam's a historian and lawyer based in New York City, holds a doctorate in international relations from the University of Oxford, England, where he was a Marshall Scholar, and a JD from Yale Law School. His writings appeared in the LA Times, Foreign Policy, The Atlantic, and raised in Tucson, Arizona. Sam, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on, and pleasure to be able to talk about the Flying Tigers.
Man, I'll go ahead and tell you, I was so fascinated with this book as an individual that is just a history guy. The way that you write and the vividness of it is just, it made it come alive. And so for our audience, tell us a little bit about the book.
Yeah, a lot of listeners might be familiar with the Flying Tigers from the famous shark-faced image of the P-40 during World War II, or might have seen the John Wayne movie, The Flying Tigers, or even seen the Robert Redford TV show on NBC in the 70s, Baba Black Sheep, that was about Happy Boyington. The Flying Tigers were almost a mythological unit from World War II who were fighting against the Japanese in China and in Burma in the opening days of World War II. But what has not really been well known about them is the true story behind them, how these were young men and some women who were part of a secret mission authorized by President Roosevelt to take on the Japanese before Pearl Harbor. And what I did was spend a couple of years traveling across the country, tracking down letters, diaries, combat reports, photographs, getting to meet the last couple members of the unit and many of their families to help tell the true, authentic story of the Flying Tigers, which had never been done before.
Which is very interesting to me. So how did you stumble upon this? What brought you to this particular point? Because again, like you said, this is a story it's a phenomenal story, but it just hasn't been told before. What led you to this particular point?
It's a great question. My grandfather was a navigator on a B-25 bomber that was flying in the Solomon Islands in the Pacific during World War II. He came back from the war and ran a hardware store in Tacoma, Washington. And I would get to see him over the summers a lot. And we would sometimes go out to aviation museums, and he would show me different relics he had from the war. And so I grew up with this great interest in aviation in World War II, and particularly in the Pacific. When I was at the University of Oxford, I was writing my doctorate dissertation on how America entered World War II, which we typically think of as a very simple story, that we were bombed at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, and then entered the war. But that's actually the reality is much more complicated than what we learn in the classroom. And I was writing about President Roosevelt's measures short of war, he called them, taking on the Japanese and the Nazis before Pearl Harbor. And in the Pacific, that took on this form of what was officially known as the American Volunteer Group, sending over these pilots and planes to illicitly fight against the Japanese. And I was interested in it and then really dug in at an archive at Yale University where I was doing my law degree and found a collection of love letters, actually, between a nurse and a pilot who were in the unit. And the pages were crumbled and yellowing, but they told a remarkable story that spoke to a human experience of what it was like to be part of this unit. And that really set me off on this quest. I just needed to know really what had gone on in this unit, and the book is a product of that journey.
There's so much to what your response was, but I can't help but think you're stumbling across these love letters. And just as any historian knows, you don't want to project your assumptions in the present day onto the past. And one of the glaring things that's always stuck out to me is just how unsafe it was to actually be a pilot during World War II. And so I can only imagine some of those love letters kind of revealed some of the dangers that it was being a pilot during those times, during those very just unreliable planes. And was that translated over into the love letters? Can you speak to kind of some of the craziness that was flying?
You're absolutely right that aviation was completely different then. Now you can just kind of jump on a plane. I was flying today into Knoxville, Tennessee, and you just get to the airport, get on a plane, and you don't even think about it. And in that era, it was very different, obviously. And the letters reveal, much more complicated human emotions than we would think of. In the media, and really, with the Flying Tigers movie that came out in 1942 with John Wayne, these guys were portrayed as heroes. But the reality was they were almost kind of there accidentally. The young pilot who's in the love letters is a guy named John Petak from New Jersey. He was a graduate of NYU University and had almost on a lark joined the Navy as an aviator. He's writing about these very early combat missions that the Flying Tigers were fighting in January 1942 in Burma, which was a British colony. Mm-hmm. And one remarkable thing that stood out was he was writing about a mission where they were attacking a Japanese base, and they shot a number of Japanese soldiers who were on the ground. And he wrote about how his conflicted moral feelings about that, how he felt that they were essentially defenseless, and he was wrestling with the question of the ethics of what he had done. So you're seeing an internal life in these men that would never be reflected in the kind of media characterizations of them, and you find a much richer experience in reading the diaries and letters of these guys. It was a great letter-writing generation. They kept wonderful diaries, many of which had been kept away for many decades. And piecing those together to tell the story shows the human and emotional dimension of what they went through.
I couldn't agree more. I did my PhD research on John F. Kennedy, and so obviously he had a pretty significant accident during World War II as well. And those letters, when I was doing research, was just so revealing of what you wouldn't see necessarily in the newspapers. But we've got to take a break right now. And so for our listening audience, if you'd like to find out more information, or I want to highly encourage you to go to our website, www.pointofview.net, click on Sam's picture. And when you go to Sam's picture, you're going to get a chance to be able to go and purchase this book, The Flying Tigers. You're going to want to pick up this book because it's a phenomenal read and phenomenal gift that you can give to someone as well. But we've got to take a break. But when we come back, more with Sam right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Astute political observers frequently notice the large gap between rhetoric and reality. That is certainly true of some of the Democrat governors in blue states. Their political rhetoric has been critical of the Trump tax reform. The reality is that their state budgets have benefited significantly from those tax cuts, along with the Trump administration deregulation. Fortunately, the editors of the Wall Street Journal collected the news stories and economic numbers to show that blue states are actually receiving a blue state dividend. A rising economic tide is lifting those states in ways that aren't often acknowledged. For example, the governor of California recently was able to revise the Golden State budget to include a $21 billion surplus. That is already a few percentage points higher than the projection just a few months ago. Illinois reported earlier this month that the individual and corporate tax revenues exceeded internal forecasts by more than $1 billion. That should eliminate most of the state's budget gap for this year. These are not the only examples. The Pew Charitable Trust noted that tax revenues in 41 states have hit records even after accounting for inflation. Revenue was up in blue states like California, New York, Connecticut, and Washington. Of course, it was also up in red states like Tennessee and Texas. At least the Pew report acknowledged that this significant and extended stretch of growth was due to the Federal Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. The increased revenue to these states was due to favorable economic conditions and robust stock returns. One more point is worth mentioning. While these state budgets have received a dividend from tax cuts and deregulation, the citizens of those states should not expect that this dividend would be passed on to them. Politicians in those states were merely going to find another way to spend that additional revenue. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, on this May 23rd, 2019 day. We're talking to Sam Kleiner, who's the author of the book, The Flying Tigers, The Untold Story of American Pilots Who Waged a Secret War Against Japan. You can find out more information on that book by going to our website, www.pointofview.net. And so we've got Sam on the line right now. Sam, you're in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I'm in Dallas right now, but I need you to know I was born in Knoxville.
Yeah, going out to Smoky Mountain National Park for a couple of days to do some hiking. So I'm excited to see that.
Well,
and one of the things that I love about writing this book is that it's led to travels all over the country because these pilots were themselves from all over the country. They came from 3 branches of service and all different walks of life. And so you have some folks who went to elite universities, others who had children of the Great Depression who had scarcely left the home states they grew up in, and all came together for this common mission as they found themselves essentially on the wrong side of the Pacific at the beginning of World War II.
Yeah, so my PhD research was centered on John F. Kennedy in his 1960 presidential election, and World War II is one of those pieces that I found to be pretty persuasive and pretty formative. Like you were alluding to, it was that time, like you said, where individuals from all different walks of life and all different parts of the country kind of came together. And when you're kind of in those trenches, in those foxholes, it inculcated a sense of tolerance within individuals that really differentiated what happened in 1928 relative to Al Smith, the first Catholic to actually run for president unsuccessfully, then what happened in 1960 with President John Kennedy being the first Catholic to actually win the presidency. And that pivotal point that what you're talking about with individuals that are sacrificing everything and leaving so much in order to go fight this great evil all across the world, specifically in the Pacific theater, as well as over in Europe, as well in the European theater, really did something within the American spirit. It seems so different than the world we're living in today.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've gotten to spend some time with the last couple surviving flying tigers. There's now only one gentleman left. His name's Frank Klazonsky. He was a mechanic in the unit, originally from Detroit, and he grew up a child of the Great Depression. His family was so poor that he would go down to the railroad tracks and try and pick up stray pieces of coal that might have fallen off a train in order to keep their home during the winter. And he then joined the Army and became a mechanic, and then joined the Flying Tigers, left behind his girlfriend Nancy for what he thought was going to be a one-year stint overseas, ended up serving for almost the duration of the war, went on to have a very long career in aviation, married Nancy. They were married for over 75 years. And I've gotten to spend some time with him. We went down to a museum and got to see one of these Flying Tiger P-40 planes. And there is certainly something in his life experience that's very special. And it was really a unique opportunity for me to get to have that human connection to him as I was writing this book, because soon we will not have that human connection to the greatest generation anymore.
That's so interesting. So kind of similar along those lines, just a question that I'm always interested in when, again, the book is just filled with so many rich stories, and there's just so much texture to a lot of those stories. And so when you think about just looking over the book, is there a story in particular that jumps out to you when writing that maybe just stuns you, or maybe that was just a really delightful surprise, or just something that you look back on was just so rich to think about?
It's a great question. I think one of the series of stories that was really amazing to me was getting to write about the actual combat that they were engaged in China and Burma. I was able to piece that together by getting the original combat reports that no historian had seen before. And there was one mission in particular that was a raid on a Japanese base, where one of the planes, one of the P-40s was shot down as they were returning, and it slowly descended and was lost. And the pilots were above, were able to see their comrade on the ground in enemy-controlled territory, but weren't able to help him. And it wasn't until the very end of the war when he was rescued from a Japanese POW camp. And some of those pilots from that raid were there to greet him when he was returned back to the base. And so there's moments like that where you really have to pause and just say, this is more incredible than fiction. There was a line in Time magazine that said some of the feats that the Flying Tigers were doing, Hollywood never could have dreamt up. And that really seemed right to me, that, some of the actual combat they were going through was so harrowing and so unbelievable, but was all true.
So you kind of alluded to it a couple of times, is this idea that we've got this generation, the greatest generation is slowly but surely making its way towards breathing their very last. And so, and like you've demonstrated in the book, and like so many others before you, it's just this understanding that there's just some rich characteristics of this generation that's just not being replicated thus far in the current generation of what we're seeing, specifically relative to millennials or even Generation Z now, as they increasingly become more public and a greater force into the workforce. Is there anything in particular, after researching this generation specifically in this particular arena, that pops out to you that would be a lesson, that would be something that would need to be heard among this current generation right now?
Yeah, I guess I'm a millennial, and I'm not so down on our generation. When I was at Oxford, I had the privilege of being a student alongside a lot of graduates from West Point and the Naval Academy who were there for a year or two, and then would go on to serve in our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and in other parts of the world. So I'm fortunate to count members of our military as close friends who've done incredible things. And I think that there's a lot of millennials who are doing really incredible work in an array of different industries. I think we're a wonderful, tolerant generation that will do great things for our country. But that's not to say that we should ever diminish the incredible accomplishments of the greatest generation, what they did. And I think the memory of that generation is vitally important. Many of these guys went through the Great Depression and then fought fascism, and they came home to do things like my grandfather owning a hardware store, or like many of these guys in the Flying Tigers would have careers that were based on, really serving the community, very humble people. And I think those are lessons. There are obviously lessons there, and these are great people for us to look up to. And I think that just keeping the history of what the United States did in that period alive is very important. I think at a time when we're uncertain of America's moral commitments in the world and the importance of human rights, obviously the work that we did fighting Imperial Japan and Nazi Germany is very relevant, and this is a moment in history that should be preserved.
That's really good. And so, Sam Kleiner, thank you so much for joining us. We greatly appreciate it. And for those of you that were listening in, please be sure to go to the Point of View website, pointofview.net, where you can find out more information on Sam and his book, The Flying Tigers. Sam, thank you so much.
Thanks so much. The book's available wherever books are sold. Appreciate you having me on.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Sam, for joining us. But we have got to go to a break right now. But when we come back from the break, we're going to continue diving into the news of the day, specifically what's happening in D.C., as well as what's continuing to happen all across the South and other parts of the country. This idea that the pro-life movement is starting to make inroads relative to what legislative pieces. And so we'll also be opening up the phone lines to you all. We'll kind of take some phone calls and figure out, hear from your point of view as well. And then, as always, as is the case, we're going to talk about news you can use. And so look through some current social science research and some interesting studies, to say the least, around Memorial Day. And so you're going to want to stick around for that. But we've got to take a break right now. But before we do, I want to encourage you to go to the website, pointofview.net. There you can find out more of the show notes, some of the articles that we're referencing, as well as Sam's book. We'll have a link to that where you can find out more information on how to buy The Flying Tigers. And then also you can make your way over to our Facebook page, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And while there, be sure to go ahead and like the page. And then you can also add your voice to the conversation. So when you see that live video box, you can just keep on scrolling down, and then you can leave a little comment or question. And what you share online, we'll try to get to over the air as well. So we have got to take a break. But when we come back from the break, more about Donald Trump, Senator Schumer, as well as Speaker Pelosi. A little bit more about the abortion laws that are continuing just to make their way through state legislatures, and then a little bit we'll channel our Arnold Schwarzenegger and talk about this rise in pieces of legislation to outlaw tobacco, or at least to raise the age of buying tobacco across states across the world. We'll be back right after this.
So you sit down and do your budget, and you look at all your monthly costs and your bills and your income, and it seems like there's never quite enough. You know what would really help? Finding $500 a month to help balance things out. That is the typical savings, $500 a month for a family when you switch to MediShare for your health care. And when it comes to healthcare sharing ministries, MediShare is really the gold standard. It's been around for 25 years and has more than 400,000 members. It's been around so long and grown so much because it works. And whether you're single or married or have kids, this could make sitting down to do a monthly budget a lot more fun. $500 a month can more than cover a car payment or pay back loans, whatever. So join MediShare and go out to dinner to celebrate. Here's the number to call. They are incredibly kind and helpful to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Tired of fake news? Support truth. Join Point of View's Truth Team and bring healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or 800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. We just got off the phone with Sam Kleiner, who's the author of the book, The Flying Tigers, The Untold Story of American Pilots Who Waged a Secret War Against Japan. And you're going to want to pick up that book. Phenomenal book. And so you can find out more information on that book at our website, pointofview.net. You can click on his page, click on his picture, and you can find out more information. His book is available wherever books are sold. And you can also listen to the interview at our website, pointofview.net, or wherever you get your podcasts from. But let's continue through the news, shall we? There's just so much that's going on right now, and I think it would be appropriate. And so we've got, going over to Georgia right now, 2 film productions quit Georgia over restrictive abortion law, according to USA Today. 2 film projects have pulled production from Georgia after the governor signed the so-called heartbeat bill, which bans abortions after a fetal heartbeat can be detected. The heartbeat can be detected as early as 6 weeks before many women realize that they are pregnant, according to USA Today. 2 movies, including the Lionsgate comedy Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar, starring SNL star Kristen Wiig, as well as Amy Mumolo. And there's another movie from an Amazon series directed by Reed Morano called The Power. Initially were to be shot in Georgia, but now will relocate. For those that can remember back a few years back in North Carolina when they passed their transgender bathroom bill, they also suffered backlash over that bill. In particular, one of the glaring examples was what the NCAA decided that they were going to do. NCAA relocated the March Madness, the basketball tournament that year away from North Carolina, and I believe moved it to Indiana, if my memory serves me correctly. And so pro-life proponents stood up, and now pro-choice advocates are walking out. Apparently for some, Alabama is not so sweet anymore. State officials in Colorado and Maryland have banned government employees from traveling to Alabama for work-related projects. Maryland also announced a plan to divest their $52 billion retirement pension fund from Alabama businesses. Basketball legend Kareem Abdul-Jabbar called for a boycott, referring to Alabama as a stain on our democracy. And over at the New York Times this morning, Dr. Warren Hearn argues in his op-ed that pregnancy kills, and it's abortion that actually saves. Alabama is the latest battleground in the culture war. The pro-life side made a great advance last week and continues to make advances, even north in Missouri as well. But inevitably, it raises the question. The question lingers as to whether such progress is worth it. Should pro-life individuals continue to pass certain bills knowing that they're going to have to face business ramifications? I'd be really interested to hear from you. Do you think that state legislatures should continue to pass these pro-life bills, even if it means businesses are going to continue to leave and these states are going to suffer financial repercussions from their decisions? You can call in 800-351-1212. Again, do you think it's worth it when these pro-life bills get put onto the books to suffer the financial ramifications from pro-choice advocates taking their industries as well as their entities out of these states? You can call in at 800-351-1212 or jump over to Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. You leave your question or comment there online, and what you leave online, we'll try to get to over the phone. Personally, for me, one of the questions that often, or scriptures that often comes to the top of my head is regarding Moses. When Moses considered leaving the comforts of a palace for a tent in the desert, he determined that the reproach of Christ was of greater wealth than the treasures of Pharaoh, according to Hebrews 11:26. Let's compare these two for a second. You see, Moses was in the comforts of Pharaoh. I'm sure that Pharaoh had servants that were waiting on him. I'm sure that Moses had his own room. I'm sure that Moses had great luxuries that were waiting for him while he was in the comforts of the palace. But then he also had the prospect of heeding the Lord's call and leading the people of God through the wilderness where he would live in a tent. As we know in the biblical narrative, there were individuals that grumbled against him and the decisions that he was making. Certain individuals decided that they were going to betray him. Others were gossiping about him. But what we find out is that, according to the writer of Hebrews, that the reproach of Christ was of greater wealth than the treasures of Pharaoh. Personally, I'd rather be unpopular in a culture of life than comfortable in a culture of death. But I'd love to hear from you. You can call in. Do you think that pro-life bills should continue to be passed even if they have financial ramifications for particular states? You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212, or jump over on Facebook.com/PointOfViewRadio. Would love to hear from you on this. I will say the illusions of what was happening in North Carolina, there was great animosity when they passed their bill relative to transgender bathrooms. One of the things and it wasn't just animosity and kind of antagonistic spirits from just one particular side. This was happening from both sides for these individuals. To a large degree, there were certain constituencies that would follow after Jesus that were saying that this isn't something that we should necessarily do. This is actually something that this would not be advantageous for our businesses. There's not a really clear scriptural mandate relative to bathrooms, so we don't need to necessarily do this. We're losing money on this. Why are we continuing to do this? There are other individuals that would say that this is something that we need to stand for. And so now, yet again, we find the same principle, but a different example in what's happening in Georgia right now. We have gone great lengths now to put into place this fetal heartbeat bill. But now the question that lingers is it worth it if we're going to suffer financially for it? And so I've laid my opinion out there. I'd rather be unpopular in a culture of life than comfortable in a culture of death. Let's hear from you. 800-351-1212. We're going to go ahead and jump to the first phone right now. We've got Tracy in North Carolina right now. Tracy, are you there?
Yes.
Hey, Tracy, what's your point of view?
I just wanted to say that I'm from North Carolina, and I hope that North Carolina will follow suit in the heartbeat bill. I'm a woman, and I am pro-life, and I believe that the minute a woman becomes pregnant, that her life is now about her child. It's not just about what she wants to do, and she made the choice to become pregnant by her actions. We all have responsibility for what we do, and that can be a responsibility of participating in that lifestyle. I also want to say that living in North Carolina, I was living here when we passed the transgender laws, and I think it hurt a lot of people, but at the same time, sometimes when you take a stand for what's right, it's not really comfortable, and you have to do it if you have character and courage to do that.
I completely agree, Tracy. I think what you all did and what we're continuing to see now down in Georgia, they're just to take a stand sometimes requires you're going to have to suffer some of the consequences. But what we know to be true is that sometimes some of those negative consequences from a worldly perspective can be very soul-shaping benefits from a spiritual perspective as well. And so, Tracy,
absolutely.
Thank you so much for your phone call. We greatly appreciate it. Again, we are asking you, the pro-life movement continue to make these strides? You know, there's an interesting little side argument that's happening right now within the pro-life movement that is wondering, are we moving too fast and are we going too far relative to some of these heartbeat bills? Specifically, I think they're talking more about what happened in Alabama, where there were no exceptions outside of mother's health, specifically not deciding not to include the exceptions of rape and incest relative to abortion in that bill. So there's a side little argument that's happening right now among the pro-life community. Are we moving too fast and are we going too far with some of these bills? Now, there's some that's going to say we're going to lose the public by going so far, by being morally consistent and logically consistent with our position. And others are saying that we just need to continue to take these incremental steps. So not only, yes, there will still be abortions in these particular instances, but we continue to earn and gain favor among the general public And that will inevitably be a tide that can stem the number of abortions that are happening across our country. Because as we know right now, today, there will be over 2,400 abortions that are committed today. And so the urgency we all feel, but we want to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves as we make our way through this world. And so we are putting the question to you. Are we moving too far too quickly? We're suffering. Georgia is the latest to suffer some of these financial repercussions for the decision that and the stand that they took. Do we need to scale back a little bit? You can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. We've got to take a break, but we'll be back right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, in for Kirby Anderson. Today, we have been talking about some of the backlash that's come out of Georgia, specifically due to the legislature passing and the governor signing the fetal heartbeat bill that would effectively ban abortion after 6 weeks, provided the exceptions of rape as well in there in the mother's health. One of the fascinating things that's coming about due to this is the backlash is around the idea. The latest would be two film productions have decided to pull their projects from Georgia. Georgia's gone to great lengths to be able to create tax incentives and discounts for film production studios to go and to shoot in Georgia. But now what we're finding is that these individuals are decided to pull back, and they're going to take their business elsewhere because they do not believe in the stances that these state houses are moving towards. And so that inevitably raises the question for individuals within the pro-life movement. Are these legislatures, are these state houses going too far and too fast if they're going to suffer some of these financial repercussions? It raises the question for me, and I've kind of shared my point of view. I'm reminded of Moses. Moses, when he was given the choice that whether he was going to, one, stick in Pharaoh's palace where he was going to have servants, he was going to be waited on, he was going to have his food provided for, there was going to be very little difficulty for him, or he was going to choose to follow the Lord's call and go into the wilderness and travel and wander for a time with a people that inevitably would betray him at times, would gossip about him at times. But yet what we find out about Moses is that he decided that the reproach of Christ was of greater worth than the treasures of Pharaoh. Essentially, if we applied that principle to today, when you take the righteous stand, that yes, we would rather be uncomfortable in a culture of life than popular in a culture of death. And so I put the question to you all is, are we moving too far, too fast, or are some of these financial repercussions worth it in order to save a child's life? To put the context and also to create a sense of urgency within us right now, what we know to be true is that the abortion rate is going down. That is something to celebrate. Over the past 3 years, the number of abortions performed has gone down. However, one abortion, I think we could all agree, is one too many. Today, if statistics prove to be correct, there will be upwards of 2,400 children that would be aborted today. And so are we moving too fast, too quick? Should we continue to take these wallops when individuals and when businesses and entities pull their business from the state? Is it worth the risk? So you can call in 800-351. Actually, you can't call in because there's a couple of people that are interested in talking about this. So you can go to the Point of View website, or rather to the Facebook page, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Go onto the Facebook page, and then when you see the live video feed, right underneath it, leave a question or comment, and what you share online, we'll try to get to over air just to prove to you that your comment will be heard. Let's read one right now on Facebook. We've got Angie in regards to the heartbeat bill movement. While I'm 100% pro-life, I find myself wondering if as disciples of Christ, are we leading people to a relationship with Christ, therefore to the Father with all of this? Are we pushing them away? Because often people who are in a crisis situation need to be loved and not judged. Angie, I think you are hitting right on a point right now that I want to hone in on, because I don't want to fall. It's called the narrowing effect for what could be happening right now, because I would say that I don't want to have to choose one over the other. I want us to fight diligently for life. I think we can fight diligently for life and still continue to exude the grace and kindness of Christ that win people into a loving relationship with the Father. I would think that I want to watch my words. It is undesirable and unbecoming for a Christian to gloat when we're winning, especially in this pro-life movement and some of the strides that we're making. I think we need to celebrate appropriately, but also recognize that many individuals feel attacked right now because many individuals think that we're taking away a woman's right, when in reality what we're doing is we're standing up for women, specifically the women that are in the womb. Many individuals, the research is very clear relative to women who are considering abortion right now. Many of these women are one of the primary reasons as to why they're getting an abortion is because, quote, they're managing an array of responsibilities and expectations. It's really hard to dream about the future with a child when the demands of the present are so real and so near. And so, yes and amen, we need to continue with one side of our mouth and with one hand push forward pro-life legislation. But on the other side, we need to be very cognizant and be very clear and very gracious and kind towards these women that are suffering right now and trying to figure out, how am I going to take care of this baby to term? I would argue that we need to do both, Angie. This isn't a choice of having to make. do one instead of the other. We've got to do both. And you know what? I believe we can do both as well. Why? Because I'm a Christian, and I believe it to be true that the Spirit of the living God is inside of me, and greater is He that is in me than he who is in the world. And that if He can raise a dead man to life, He can help me to continue to fight for life, but also treat people with grace and with kindness to enrich their life and hopefully point them to the source of life. And so let's continue taking some phone calls right now. Let's take a phone call in Georgia right now. We've got Ginger in Georgia. Ginger, are you there?
I am.
Hey, Ginger, what is your point of view?
My point of view is, being from Georgia, I'm extremely proud of my governor and our General Assembly for choosing the pro-life stance. And I think that we need to step back and think that when we look at this, that's about the temporal. The choices that we make in pro-life are about the eternal. Matter of fact, I'm so proud of them. I'm going to do vacation inside my own state because we have a lot of different things that we can do here because I want to give back to the economy. So I'm not leaving the state this summer. I'm just going to go to the different pieces, the mountain, the beach, and those type things. And I feel like God bless Tracy from North Carolina for standing up too. And I just think there's so much that we can do and spend in our own state. And so many people, I think they come here just like the film industry, and they want to change who we are and what we stand for. And I think that it's important for us to stand up for the beliefs that we hold dear in our state. So I'm very proud of Governor Kemp.
You know what? I'll go ahead and say this, though. Ginger, I'm from Tennessee, so we share a border. I'm here in Texas now, but I will tell you, I love some Georgia. I grew up an Atlanta Braves fan, so I watched the Atlanta Braves, watched Terry Pendleton, Otis Nixon, David Justice, etc.
Yeah.
Went to Fulton County Stadium, then went to Turner Field, and just recently went to the new SunTrust Park there. Love what's happening there.
Absolutely.
And then can't go wrong if you go to Savannah, then make your way. I mean, you can go to Savannah if you'd like. Great Lakes in Augusta over there. Go visit. Go visit the
Lake Oconee. Yeah, and you got Martin Luther King, the Civil Rights Museums. You've got Savannah, the oldest city. I mean, it's just a beautiful state, and I don't want us to lose focus on. We can take care of ourselves. We don't need. It's not that we mind people coming. We want them to come, but we want them to respect the beauty and the history of this state and what we stand for. And I feel like our governor and our General Assembly have done that.
I will warn our listeners though. If you go to Savannah, I got a warning about Savannah. Yeah, go there, but be prepared that you might end up living there because it is so beautiful. And those biscuits in Savannah are, my goodness gracious. Every time I eat a biscuit in Savannah, I feel like my productivity goes down. And I don't know if I'll, but nevertheless, Ginger, thank you so much for joining us. We've got to go to a break right now. But when we come back from the break, there's some interesting film numbers on Georgia right now as more and more businesses are deciding to pull out, and specifically the industry's pulling out. You're going to be shocked by the significance that Georgia's been able to make relative to the film industry. We'll be back right after this.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. If you've been joining us for the past 2 hours, thank you so much for doing so. But if you're just now joining us, know that we have covered quite a bit of ground. So let me catch you up for a little bit. We talked a little bit about what happened in the Oval Office yesterday, and specifically making its way out into the Rose Garden. President Trump interacting with, during this week of infrastructure, interacting with Speaker Pelosi and Senator Chuck Schumer, and trying to come to an agreement as to how they might be able to fund this $2 billion infrastructure bill. Ended up coming to loggerheads and not necessarily being able to build that figurative bridge, and in turn causing quite a scene. President Trump, the meeting lasting only 3 minutes, stormed out into the Rose Garden to express his displeasure with what happened. And then we transitioned, and we're talking a little bit about what's happening in Georgia right now with this fetal heartbeat bill. Now more and more industries are leaving the state due to the individuals of the pro-life bent are taking a stand, and pro-choicers are then leaving, it seems as though, and raising the question of whether it's worth it. We made our way over to Beverly Hills, similar to the Clampetts, and talked about the ban on tobacco that they offered up, trying to understand from a biblical perspective the benefits, the negatives of smoking. What does it look like when you have the temple of God, and when God, your body is a temple, and the God of the universe is abiding inside of you? Is smoking a good thing or a bad thing? But we're going to make our way back to Georgia right now, because I think there's some really interesting things that are happening in Georgia right now. We opened up the phone lines. We've got many of you that are calling in right now, because the question that I have really is simple. As individuals of pro-life continue to take a stand, individuals of pro-choice and the companies they represent are leaving in turn. And specifically, this revolves around the latest news of how 2 movie productions have decided that they are going to leave the state. They're leaving the state, and in turn, the pro-lifers are going to have to question whether it's worth it. Is the stance that they're taking worth it? There's an individual, Joel, on Facebook said, "Is it worth it?" Of course it is, Nick. These are stances that God calls us to take, no matter what the cost or worldly impact. Now's the time when we all have been prepared for. You know, that I completely agree with Joel there. And so we're going to be taking some of your phone calls. Do you think that it's worth it? You can call in 800-351-1212, or you can jump over on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Leave your question or comment online, and we'll what you share online, we'll try to get to over air as well. But as you all know, I'm kind of a numbers guy, and so let's look at some of the numbers. The Georgia film industry right now generates an estimated 92,000 jobs and billions of dollars in direct spending. The entertainment business has faced kind of sweet tax credits since they were passed in 2008. And over the time, Georgia has continued to build quite a portfolio and cater to the film industry. It's the 3rd largest state for film and TV production in the United States, behind only California and New York. It also hands out approximately $800 million in tax credits a year, more than any Canada or any other state in the union. And so now that Georgia has passed this heartbeat bill, there are certain industries that are pulling out, and the question lingers as to whether this is worth it. And so we have opened up the phone lines. So let's go to one, shall we? Let's go to Dolly in South Carolina. Dolly, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, Dolly, what's your point of view?
My point of view is, if Jesus would leave the 90 and 9 and go after the one, if we could save one soul, if we could save that one, we need to do it. And I stand with Georgia, and I just tell them to stand strong, because Job lost so much, but he took a stand, and he said, I know my Redeemer lives. And he was rewarded over and above after all the problems he went through. So no matter what, no matter how many businesses go away, I think God will bless them for taking that stand. And I say, go Georgia.
Well, thank you so much, Dolly. I am of agreement with you. I think that's a great point that you make relative to Jesus' parable about being the good shepherd that would leave the 99 for the one. Again, I think another great point relative to Job as well, and how Job lost greatly, but he gained so much more. I'm often reminded in Job 42:5, I think it's just such a poignant line where he says that I had once heard you, but now I've seen you. That even going through all those difficulties, he experienced a greater intimacy with God, that he had once heard him, but now he had seen him after he had gone through so much. Dolly, thank you so much for your comments. They've been greatly appreciated.
Thank you, and God.
And so we'll continue on the phone calls. And so let's go to Marlene, also in South Carolina right now. Marlene, are you there?
Yes, sir, I am here.
Yes,
I absolutely love hearing all these other people's comments. I agree with the lady, Dolly, that was just on. Absolutely. It doesn't matter what the cost is. We answer to a higher standard. The devil is the one, the enemy of our life and of Jesus Christ is the one that's trying to stamp out everything that is good that God has created. As far as a female being pregnant, I am sorry that they are deceived in thinking it's okay to do this to their human body, to their baby. I don't hear very much about the father and what he has to say about it. I know a lot of fathers that have gotten these girls inseminated have disappeared, but we're not hearing very much of how the men feel about this. As far as I'm concerned, nobody has the right to take another life. God said, thou shalt not kill, and he meant it. He didn't say just, Cain and Abel. He didn't say just let's not kill people in war. He didn't make any other extensions of what his commandment said. And taking a life, I feel bad for the women that are deceived. Last night I looked on the news, all these celebrities that trying so hard to convince these young girls, let these old dictators stop ruling our bodies. You know what? It's not our bodies. Our body is from God. God can take our life today. He can let us live today. Everything is in his hand. It is his choice.
Yeah.
If women are having a problem, I'm an adopted child, by the way. There's other avenues. You don't have to abort your baby.
Yeah.
You can carry your baby to term, and you can give it up if you don't think you can mentally, emotionally, or financially take care of it. There's millions of people out there that are dying to have children that don't or can't.
Yeah, Marlene,
for one reason or other. Give them away.
Yeah, Marlene, I'm keenly aware. We actually were talking about this on Tuesday during the Millennial Roundtable, that there are 443,000 children in the foster care system right now. And what would it look like? What would it look like if just one member, or maybe 1.5 families from every church, the 300,000 churches, decided that, you know what, James 1:27 is pressed upon my heart, and it's time for me to care for the orphans and widows to such an extent that we're going to create a wait list for individuals to be able to adopt children. Marlene, thank you so much for your comment. We've got to go to a break right now, but when we come back from the break, more over the abortion issue, specifically in Georgia. Is the price worth it? We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Astute political observers frequently notice the large gap between rhetoric and reality. That is certainly true of some of the Democrat governors in blue states. Their political rhetoric has been critical of the Trump tax reform. The reality is that their state budgets have benefited significantly from those tax cuts, along with the Trump administration deregulation. Fortunately, the editors of the Wall Street Journal collected the news stories and economic numbers to show that blue states are actually receiving a blue state dividend. A rising economic tide is lifting those states in ways that aren't often acknowledged. For example, the governor of California recently was able to revise the Golden State budget to include a $21 billion surplus that is already a few percentage points higher than the projection just a few months ago. Illinois reported earlier this month that the individual and corporate tax revenues exceeded internal forecasts by more than $1 billion. That should eliminate most of the state's budget gap for this year. These are not the only examples. The Pew Charitable Trust noted that tax revenues in 41 states have hit records even after accounting for inflation. Revenue was up in blue states like California, New York, Connecticut, and Washington. Of course, it was also up in red states like Tennessee and Texas. At least the Pew report acknowledged that this significant and extended stretch of growth was due to the federal Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. The increased revenue to these states was due to favorable economic conditions and robust stock returns. One more point is worth mentioning. While these state budgets have received a dividend from tax cuts and deregulation, the citizens of those states should not expect that this dividend would be passed on to them. Politicians in those states were merely going to find another way to spend that additional revenue. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. We have been talking about the backlash that's coming out of Georgia right now. Specifically, 2 film productions have left Georgia over the abortion law. And so specifically, let's look at some of the dynamics that are in play right now. The Georgia film industry generates an estimated 92,000 jobs and billions of dollars in direct spending. It's the 3rd largest state for film and TV production in the United States, behind only California and New York. It also hands out $800 million in tax credits a year, more than Canada or any other state in the union. Several independent production companies, including the one that brought the 3 Hunger Games movies to Georgia, have publicly stated that Georgia now is a no-go state for them. Dozens of actors, such as Alec Baldwin, Sean Penn, Gabrielle Union, have vowed to avoid the state as well, all because of the pro-life bill that was passed in the Georgia House, signed by the Georgia governor. And now individuals are raising the question in this fight for life, the latest in the culture wars, is it worth it? Making these advances in state houses, is it worth it? And so we have been taking your phone calls right now. So you can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. You can jump on over to facebook.com/pointofviewradio as well. Let's go to Michael in South Carolina right now. Michael, are you there?
Yes, sir, I am.
Hey, Michael, which point of view?
Hey, I want to just tell you, I love your show. I listen every day. It's fantastic, the stuff that y'all bring out that other news shows and other people don't. I wanted to say, following Marlene and Dolly, both from South Carolina there, that they had very good points to bring up. You know, Nick, anybody can do the wrong thing.
Yeah.
You don't even have to put any effort through to do the wrong thing. to walk a narrow line and to do the right thing, it takes effort.
Yep.
And in that effort, there are costs.
Mm-hmm.
And in those costs, sometimes it's uncomfortable. But, Georgia hands these people a lot of breaks to get their business. And what I feel is that the movie industry is just putting profit ahead of what's doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my point of view. I feel that, Georgia's a beautiful state. I live about 35 miles from Savannah. I shop there all the time. I do a lot of stuff there. I love the state of Georgia, go to the mountains and all that. And, if there's one less movie made there or two less movies made there, so be it. It'll be made up for in tourism or other things that are going on. And where people are doing the right thing, good Lord will provide for that.
Yep. I completely agree with you, Michael. I think it's going to require us not only to take the harsh stands in these bills, but we're also going to have to come and support as well. So you can count me as an individual that plans on making a little trip to Georgia here pretty soon, because I know that they're going to lose some money with some of these films that are going away, but they're going to take my money because I love some peaches.
Absolutely. And those biscuits you were talking about.
Oh my gosh, those biscuits are so good. We just do tacos out here. I mean, I'm sure there are places that do biscuits here, but man, but I do love breakfast tacos out here. But nevertheless,
Yes,
you're going to
sir.
make me hungry, Michael. Goodness gracious. Okay, thanks so much for calling in. Let's jump on over to Terry in Texas right now. Terry, are you there?
I'm here. Praise the Lord for Alabama and Georgia, the legislators there. And, my point of view is we need to choose this day who we will serve. Jesus said you can't serve both God and money. Jesus said, what would it profit a man if you gain the whole world and in the end lose your soul?
Mm.
And, I think one of his disciples was a good example, or Judas sold out Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. So we cannot sell out the Lord or these little children.
Yep.
And one last thing I would add is I was at they had a Day of Action march in Fort Worth Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
And there were about 2 Christians there, and the rest were the pro-choice people. But it really just seemed like a bunch of angry, older people there that were at these events on the pro-choice side. I mean, there wasn't much youth there. There wasn't many young people. It was like people in their 60s.
Wow.
And they just seemed like a bunch of just really angry, kind of leftist people.
Yeah, Terry,
that's my point of view.
You bring up a really great point, something I alluded to earlier. One of the things that I think we in the pro-life movement have got to do is we've got to continue to fight for life, yes and amen. But we need to remember that individuals will know us by our love, one, and two, that it's kindness that leads to repentance. Gloating has no place in the Christian life. We have got to continue to celebrate, yes and amen, but we have to recognize as well that we're surrounded by individuals that are dealing with a lot right now. If the statistics prove to be correct, there's upwards of 50 to 60% of individuals that get an abortion that claim to be Christians. And so if anything, we need to be measured in our celebration, but also recognize there are a lot of people that are suffering right now. And we want to be the hands and feet of Jesus to help people in their need, to help people help people understand that it shouldn't even be thinkable that they would commit an abortion, that they would get an abortion, because they know that they have such a good neighbor in us to do that as well. So yes, let's celebrate. Yes, let's support our brothers and sisters that are losing businesses, but we also need to be keenly aware that we are surrounded by people right now that potentially have either gotten an abortion, one, or considering an abortion, two. And we need to be aware of that and remind them by our actions as well as our words about the kindness and goodness of our God. It's shocking that 1 in 4 women have gotten an abortion. That's just a shocking number. But continue on. Let's go to Jim in Georgia right now. Jim, are you there?
Yeah. How you doing?
Hey, Jim. What's your point of view, my man?
I just listen to everybody talk, and I think that I'm kind of wondering if anybody's ever put a line on, Georgia had 31,900 abortions in 2017.
Wow.
If you apply that to the tax credit, that's $927 million. I can't imagine that the movie industry could pull that much out of the state of Georgia.
Yeah.
I mean, somewhere along the way, somebody needs to do the math and say, okay, the newspaper should report, okay, a movie pulled out and say, okay, we're not going to do it in the state of Georgia, but we lost 60 lives today. They ought to be required to report that kind of thing. And I know that won't happen, but
That's a
It's
great
fair.
point, actually. That'd be an interesting number to be able to know. What I know right now, just based on the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, is you've got 92,000 jobs and billions of dollars, it says, in direct spending. But we don't know an exact number on that. But I also know that you all have given out about $800 million in tax credits a year. So balancing all that out, that would be a really interesting number to be able to find out, Jim.
Yeah, I think somebody will look into it.
Yep. But the unintended consequences, something that you can't put down, is just imagine the wealth that will be created because another child has been saved and is going to contribute to the Georgian economy and the Georgia society in such a way that will be beneficial not only for the kingdom of heaven, but also for the state of Georgia as well.
Long-term effects of our actions.
And let's hope it's not going to help. That child won't be a good Georgia football player that will stay with the Bulldogs. Let's hope you raise some good people, you raise some good football players that go to north to Tennessee, to Vanderbilt specifically, and help my Commodores.
No, go Dogs.
Thank you so much, Jim. Appreciate it. Okay, let's go one last phone call. We've got RT in South Carolina.
Hey, how you?
Doing well, my man. How are you? Are you there? All righty. We'll go to one more. Let's go Donna. We've got Donna in Georgia as well.
Hi.
Hey, Donna. What's your point of view?
My point of view is if they are going to do this, let them go. When you stand for the right thing with God, God is going to be standing with you. And the money that they take out, God will bring back in that and more. It's just like Dan Cathy. They keep trying to boycott him, but look how God blesses his business, and he will do the same thing for Georgia and for anybody else that stands up for the right. It's never right to take the life, but when you stand for what's right and stand for these unborn children, God's going to bless that.
I completely agree. Our God works in mysterious ways, and he provides for us in abundant ways. And I believe it to be true that when these businesses, if they continue to pull out the way that they do, and it's not just going to be limited to Georgia, I would imagine it's going to continue to ripple across states that have passed these type of bills. I think God's going to bless a life that seeks to live, that seeks to honor him through the laws that are passed as well. Well, Donna, thank you so much for your phone call. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
All righty. Well, we have got to go to a break right now. We're going to be switching gears a little bit after the break. We've got an individual on from the TechFreedom group. They're going to be talking to us about technology and freedom of speech. I am really interested in this because, as you know, we have been talking about for some time this idea of how it seems as though certain social media entities are biased, to say the least. And so is this a good thing? Is this something that the government should get in and try to police or try to referee? Or simply should we just let the market correct it? We're going to be talking about that right after the break. So I hope you'll stay with us, and we'll be back right after this.
So you sit down and do your budget, and you look at all your monthly costs and your bills and your income, and it seems like there's never quite enough. You know what would really help? Finding $500 a month to help balance things out. That is the typical savings, $500 a month for a family when you switch to MediShare for your health care. And when it comes to healthcare sharing ministries, MediShare is really the gold standard. It's been around for 25 years and has more than 400,000 members. It's been around so long and grown so much because it works. And whether you're single or married or have kids, this could make sitting down to do a monthly budget a lot more fun. $500 a month can more than cover a car payment or pay back loans, whatever. So join MediShare and go out to dinner to celebrate. Here's the number to call. They are incredibly kind and helpful to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Tired of fake news? Support truth. Join Point of View's Truth Team and bring healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or 800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this. are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. We're shifting gears a little bit. We've been talking about the backlash that's come out of Georgia right now, specifically with regards to some of their push, the pro-life push to be able to kind of establish this fetal heartbeat bill. And now we're finding out that certain companies and entities are moving out. Specifically, what we found yesterday is that two companies, two film productions, have decided to pull out of Georgia despite the tax incentives there, because the pro-choice movement has decided to pull out when the pro-life movement decided to take a stand. But we're switching gears quite a bit in that we're joined as well by Ashkhen Kazaryan, is the Director of Civil Liberties at TechFreedom. She manages and develops policy projects on free speech, artificial intelligence, surveillance reform, and sharing economy. Ash, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Well, we are so excited that you're here. I'm going to go ahead and tell you, when I read your op-ed, I found myself just smiling, but also so many questions as well. And so we've gone ahead and put her op-ed on the website at www.pointofview.net. It's titled, "Some Conservatives Need a First Amendment Refresher." So help us, for our listeners that haven't read it yet, tell us a little bit of the premise of your op-ed.
Sure. So I think it's important to start by saying that in the last 2 years, we've seen a very interesting societal change in public's opinion about tech companies. Tech companies used to be, those geeky guys in the basement who were kind of making the world better and creating all these cool tools. And we were, in general, we had a positive view of them. And we always thought, all the big Silicon Valley companies, they have all these cool campuses. It was like part of a myth. And in the last few years, because of a number of things that happened, including the election and just the political turmoil and the political kind of aggressiveness that occurs from both sides on social media, including some people asking to break up the big tech and saying that they're too powerful, privacy breaches, things like that, all, different issue areas and different things that we need to address separately, all together created this phenomenon called techlash, where the public wants something to get done. And basically anything that happens with any digital imprint is the fault of the tech companies. So after that happened, obviously we have been having a conversation about the social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter and Google to some extent moderating content on their platform. And by that I mean when someone posts something on their platform, Facebook has their own policies, Twitter has their own policies, and then they are able to moderate, delete, edit, not edit, but change who can see whatever you posted in however way they want to, right? However way they decided they should do it themselves. And a lot of conservatives have said that these companies are censoring them. And I am putting the word censoring in air quotation marks.
Yeah.
Because only government can censor, and I would really ask anyone who's engaging in this debate to keep in mind that word means government censorship, not private censorship, because private censorship is just content moderation. And there are a lot of things to unbundle here too. Number one is obviously tech companies are mostly they consist of very liberal-minded people. They're people who are on the left on the political scale. They all live or work and mostly are scattered across California and other very blue states. So conservatives have this kind of fear, and they don't distrust of the companies because they say, well, it's all the liberals. They give money to democratic causes. They don't believe in what I believe in, and that's why they're censoring me. And then that's something that obviously is an understandable worry and is an understandable, distrust. However, that has nothing to do with what we should do with the regulation of the company. And there's this thing called Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act that was passed in 96 that was very bipartisan. It was written by a Republican and a Democrat. That gives us platforms and, your website too. So I looked at your website. It has a comment section at a few places. Gives any platform, and you would be considered a platform because you host third-party content, protection from liability for something someone else said. That protection has been attacked by a lot of Republicans recently, including Senator Ted Cruz on, federal level. Senator Cruz said his companies, they're not neutral. If they want protection from liability, they need to be neutral. Well, that's legally incorrect. And, Senator Cruz, he knows better. He is a Harvard Law graduate, and he's a smart fella. He's not someone who actually doesn't understand technology. Because there are obviously members of Congress who are like that. We've had members who don't understand Facebook's model, how they make money. We've seen we've all seen those hearings where,
oh man, those are so painful to watch.
They're like, how do you make money? And Mark Zuckerberg, and probably the funniest thing he's ever said, says, Senator, we sell ads.
That was so painful. After that first level of questions that had been written by staffers, I would assume that second level of questioning was just, it was very difficult to watch.
Anyway, but my point is, Senator Cruz knows better, and he obviously has some personal agenda in attacking these platforms. And, some might say, well, these are big companies, and it's Senator Cruz. Why should I care? Well, why you should care is because these are private companies, number one. Private companies, just like, a baker in Colorado. So if you think that a baker in Colorado should say no and express their speech in any way they want, to, let's say, a gay couple asking for a wedding cake, you can't at the same time say, oh, but this big private company, because it's big and because I just don't like it, the same rule shouldn't apply to them. So that's that kind of First Amendment dichotomy that now I see, unfortunately, spreading across the country, and I'm trying to talk about it to warn people from that.
So, Ash,
another thing is, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, another thing is, if you don't want the government, if you're willing to give government the tools to decide which speech is okay and not, are you not aware that whatever party you support, the other party sooner or later is going to come to power? So are Republicans, is Senator Cruz not worried that what President Elizabeth potentially can deem hateful speech or speech that's not allowed on platforms if government would have those tools? I would worry about that a lot if I was anyone who cares about the political process and the democracy in this country.
Completely agree. So help me understand, though. So you have some that are going to say, well, Facebook isn't necessarily operating, because they would just say that Facebook needs to be reclassified, right? You hear that. You hear these entities that are saying, well, Facebook right now is that kind of an open platform where they're protected from libel laws, where they're protected from getting sued simply because they're not moderating the content. But from differentiating from like a point of view website where we are responsible for what's put on there. If we defame someone, if we say something, if we defame someone, we'll just use that example. We're responsible for that, and we can be sued because of that. So we've got to be a little bit more careful. That's why we have an editor or an editor-in-chief that's moderating some of the content there. But on Facebook, that's not like that. And so what would you say to the individuals that are saying, well, Facebook needs to operate more into that space where they need to hire an editor-in-chief that allows some moderation of content if they're going to continue to kind of not even like moderate some of the content that's already on there?
That's a very, smart and at the same time misguided line of attack.
Okay.
Because so what a lot of people say is that, well, Facebook should be a publisher. They're a publisher.
Mm-hmm.
And since they're a publisher like you guys, right, as a newspaper, you are liable for whatever you publish. There are a few things that you need to keep in mind. First of all, it's like saying that a bookstore should be liable for every single book that they sell. Just if we think about analogies. Number two is the scale. Amount of posts and amount of speech that's online, right, on every of those platforms is just the scale of moderation and the scale of just in general what gets posted and what kind of content. Like think about YouTube, hours and hours, billions of hours of videos get uploaded every day.
Yeah.
So it's just physically impossible to truly be a publisher like your editor-in-chief and decide what speaks for the voice of you and what doesn't. Third is that these companies are not, they're not the old school media. I think a lot of generations have a problem moving and understanding the new digital era. web platforms are transcending borders. They are transcending societies. They're creating online communities. Their goal is not to express an opinion or to change an opinion. Whatever their mission is, it's not that. And kind of thinking about them in the same way is basically going to either change the internet like we know it and break the internet. And what would either happen is every single dark, awful part of humanity is going to be online with no one to moderate it.
Well, that sounds great. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Ash, we've got to take a break right now, but when we come back from the break, we're going to continue this conversation. Really interested in a couple of little pieces, but we got to take a break. We'll be back right after this.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. We've been talking a little bit about tech censorship. And so, Ash, help me understand this for a little bit. Okay, so we know that potentially Facebook could be moderating some of the discussion that's happening on Facebook, as well as Twitter with their shadow banning, if that's happening right now. And so conservatives, obviously, as you put in your op-ed piece, are kind of up in arms about this, because they feel as though they're subject to this. It's not censorship, as you've told us. It's introducing concepts that aren't appropriate to this particular conversation. And so if this is happening, then what would you offer up? What should conservatives do in light of this?
There are a few things. So there's this really great, very substantive research from Harvard University by Yongshai Benkler. It's called the Network Propaganda. And it's about, They just collected a lot of empirical evidence about who gets silenced and why. Because activists of Black Lives Matter also get silenced when they post screenshots of the death threats that they get. So part of it is understanding how this ecosystems work. Part of it is not engaging. I think a lot of people would just repost things or copy paste links. So sometimes it's even just putting an emphasis on educating generations about how to use technology. That's number one. Number two is obviously, as I mentioned in the beginning, it's understandable that conservatives don't trust the platforms. I say demanding transparency, demanding answers, demanding better process where you can appeal something, where you can talk to a person and kind of present your point of view and why you said what you said is also very important. And I think we as a society are giving ourselves way less credit than we deserve. If you think about it, every single mess up in the last few years that tech companies had, the backlash that we as people, provided made them change their ways. So I think talking about this is very important. What I think is a very dangerous territory is for the public and for American citizens to talk to their representatives and say, you should do something about this, because that's when we get into First Amendment territory, and that's when we can hurt one of the main things that protect American democracy. In countries like Europe, like France, Germany, Europe as a general, EU regulations that they have, they don't have the same First Amendment protections that Americans do. Mm-hmm. In Europe, you would think that you can say in America, you can't say in Europe, and they would be banned. So I'm personally ethnically Armenian. In Europe, it's a crime to deny Armenian genocide from happening, because there's still people who do. In America, it's not. So me on a personal level, obviously, when I see people tweeting at me or posting and commenting and saying vile things and saying that it didn't happen and that my ancestors were not slaughtered, it's extremely hard. Mm-hmm. However, I understand that I'd rather engage with these people and I'd rather have a conversation and I'd rather know that they still exist and they're somewhere there and they think these awful thoughts and just know that it's happening than pushing them into the shadows, because negativity and just, misinformation, it wouldn't go away if you kick people off the platform or if you don't let them express themselves. So I think, first of all, we need to appreciate the system we have. Mm-hmm. Second of all, we need to be very aware that trying to amend Section 230 or trying to change how the First Amendment works, even though, a lot of the things that Senator Cruz is proposing, they would eventually lose in the Supreme Court. In the Supreme Court that we have right now, that's in majority, we have conservative justices. Senator Cruz's ideas would lose on there, and he knows it damn well. Mm. So that's number two. And number three is understanding that the free market works, understanding that wherever we go and wherever we, show the platforms what we're okay with and not okay with, they will listen. If you don't like how Facebook is treating you, go off Facebook. Yeah. Remember, there was Yahoo that was the major search engine. Remember, there was MySpace that was a major social media platform. They're gone now. There are new platforms coming in as we speak. This is not final.
So I guess one of the things that I would offer up, and I don't know if I kind of caught you clearly, so you don't think that there's any moderating that's happening on Facebook right now, or do you think there is? And
there's definitely moderating. Okay. So Facebook is definitely moderating.
Okay. Would you say it's bent towards conservatives, that they're moderating against conservatives?
So honestly, looking at the empirical data that I have seen as of right now, there are trends that some of the conservative speech is being is being moderated more. Yeah. That it's being disincentivized more. Yeah. However, the reasons behind it might not be because Facebook has an internal policy to silence conservatives. It's because they probably have an internal policy to silence a certain type of way people speak or a certain type of ideas. Mm-hmm. And even if they do, honestly, if Twitter was like, you know what, from now on, you can only post photos of dogs. No cats, no one else allowed, only dogs. They can do that.
And be okay with me. I love dogs.
Yeah. I'm also a dog person. But that's the first step. That's the first step to this conversation. It's for the platforms to accept that their algorithms and their humans mess up, because both algorithms are not perfect, and humans are not perfect. There's always a margin for error. Second step is understanding that we don't want to break free speech and we don't want to break internet. Neither of those things should be broken. And the third one is just kind of having the conversation, going to the platforms and asking them for transparency and asking them for more information about what's going on.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I'm really interested in, because if I'm just completely honest with you, and maybe we're kindred spirits on this, I mean, the idea that we have, it kind of didn't originate, but I really started to be amplified, this idea of this intolerant tolerance, right? Got a man at Yale with Bill Buckley about talking about how conservative speech is being censored, it's being, or I guess moderated, I guess we would say, if we wanted to be consistent with that. And so it seems as though there's just been a certain segment within the population, and I don't think it's limited to conservatives, that continue to say, well, my speech is being moderated and my speech is being limited. But I think one of the shining examples of what I so appreciate about what Buckley did was that he created those institutions that you were alluding to. And so he simply didn't just lament the problem, he went and did something about it. So he created the National Review, he created Young Americans for Freedom, he created these entities and organizations that he had control over. And I think that it seems as though that would be a much more productive conversation to have and push to move towards, instead of just lamenting the problems that we currently face, to try to create new solutions, or more specifically, institutions that will survive past us, that will allow the message to go forward.
Absolutely, because if we keep the internet open and free, there will be places for people to organize and create their own communities. Actually, later in the evening, I'm going to a gala that's going to be presenting the Buckley Awards to people who are fighting that fight. And I would absolutely agree that, you've got to use, I was born and raised in Russia, and I've seen that what free speech being taken away does to a country. So I would encourage everyone in America to appreciate what you have, to appreciate the First Amendment, and use it as your weapon.
Like so many great things. Well, Ash, thank you so much for joining us. We greatly appreciate it. And you can find her article on our website at pointofview.net. It's a very challenging article. I really appreciate it. And so you can go to our website. But now we've got to go to a close. And so we want to say thank you so much to Andrew and to Steve for the great work that you've done. If you'd like to find out more information on Point of View, or go back and listen to today's show, you can go ahead and do that wherever you find your podcast and listen to your podcast. Or you can go on our website, pointofview.net, or make your way over to the Facebook page, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And while there, be sure to like us, and then, hey, share us a little bit. See if social media moderates you. No, I'm just kidding. They won't moderate you. We're fine. We're good. But I am so grateful that you have decided to join us. Now you've put up with me for 3 times this week. You fortified your spirits, and you can know that I am grateful for your support of us as well. And so without further ado, hope you have a great rest of the day. I'll see you next time.
So you sit down and do your budget, and you look at all your monthly costs and your bills and your income, and it seems like there's never quite enough. You know what would really help? Finding $500 a month to help balance things out. That is the typical savings, $500 a month for a family when you switch to MediShare for your health care. And when it comes to healthcare sharing ministries, MediShare is really the gold standard. It's been around for 25 years and has more than 400,000 members. It's been around so long and grown so much because it works. And whether you're single or married or have kids, this could make sitting down to do a monthly budget a lot more fun. $500 a month can more than cover a car payment or pay back loans, whatever. So join MediShare and go out to dinner to celebrate. Here's the number to call. They are incredibly kind and helpful to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Tired of fake news? Support truth. Join Point of View's Truth Team and bring healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team. pointofview.net/team. Or 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have.